One of the many crowning achievements of Sifu is the relative accessibility of its combat. Now, don't get me wrong, I am not good at this game. I still don't think I have dodged one sweep to this very day, and when it comes to fighting games in general, as soon as I see that list of combos, I'm out. In Sifu, the combos aren't very complicated. A certain move might only have one or two inputs. If you're not a control connoisseur like me, you can absolutely get away with spamming light and heavy attacks. The complexity in Sifu's moveset is how you combine all the different moves. This is all structured around the structure mechanic. Both you and your opponent have a structure bar. Guarding requires structure, and attacks break it. If you time your guard well in a parry move, that also breaks your opponent's structure. Once an opponent's structure is broken, they are left vulnerable to further attacks. You can expedite this process by using moves that stun or by avoiding attacks altogether. When you avoid an attack, time slows for a moment, and you can use this window to advance on your opponent, ignoring their guard, leaving them open to a flurry of attacks. You start to recognize attack windows and how to best combine defense and offense to dispatch your enemies, of which there are many. And the more enemies there are, the more sophisticated this combat system becomes. Enemies do not wait. We've all seen that scene from The Matrix. Just like Neo, it is easy to be overwhelmed.
It is inevitable.
Just because you dodged or parried one attack doesn't mean that 3 more won't be thrown at you right after, at the same time. Spacing is paramount to controlling a fight. Not only is your mastery of the moveset a critical factor in your success, but so is your mastery of the environment. Throwing your enemies into the terrain momentarily stuns them, giving you a window for a quick takedown, or allowing you a moment to reassess the fight. But once you learn the complexities of Sifu's moveset, the environment becomes a critical tool in your violent expression. The environment only exists as a link in the chain of Sifu's vast combat sandbox, but without that link, the chain breaks. Whether it's weapons, walls, or elevators, the environment serves as your only friend in a fight. Sifu is an isolating game. It is you against the world, quite literally. But when the world looks this good, I say bring it on. While the environment does show variation amongst and within its 5 distinct levels, for combat to remain exciting, it too needs variation, especially when the game relies so heavily on repetition. Sifu features a vast extent of enemy types. You get the agile, you get the brute, and all the rest, and while that is all well and good for variation, it's important to note its impact on the pacing. Slowclap should be commended on how they've approached this. While some enemies are definitely more difficult than others, how and when they're introduced is critical to maintaining the game's pace. A difficult encounter with one enemy will be balanced afterwards with a quick fight against easy opponents, and vice versa. Making your way through the same level multiple times can become a drag if any sections of those levels are annoying or slow. But all the levels are carefully designed here. There is no procedural generation, so in turn, no randomness. The same enemy will be in the same spot, in the same level every time, without fail. But it never lags. Sifu doesn't just rely on the depths of its combat mechanics to maintain engagement. It relies on its flawless level design. The way each encounter is structured and ordered cannot be overlooked. There's always enough enemies to remain exciting, but never too much to become exhausting. Each encounter is contained. They don't leak into other encounters, so each fight is tackled one at a time. Although an encounter may seem frustrating, it is never unfair. It is precisely measured, so the only thing that matters is your skill. Once you open a door, that door closes and you fight your way to the next door. This creates gradual steps that inform your progression through a level, so that progression always feels constant and the pace of it is never held back. While the novelty of each level can wear off quickly, they are consistently deep and distinct from one another that you're always enjoying your time kicking and punching your way through them. Each level tells a vastly different story, mostly stemming from its presentation. While the game opens up to you, the levels do as well. The path through a level is just as important as the contents of a level. Initially, the path is direct and straightforward, but the more you investigate, the more you discover. Shortcuts, mysteries, and items are all stored deep within a level to either make your path easier or more complex. And due to the nature of Sifu's progression, ease and complexity are both desirable. The more complex your path, the more rewarding your path becomes. This facilitates agency over your path through a level. If your run is going particularly well, it might be worth adding more complexity for more reward. If it isn't going as well, it might be worth taking shortcuts and saving the complexity for later. The levels in Sifu are tightly executed. Their branches are clear to the player and they provide mechanical depth while allowing for player agency in how they can be approached. In terms of gameplay, the level design of Sifu is outstanding. Not too long to overstay their welcome, but not too shallow that they become a bore. With how scripted they actually are, it's shocking how I never became bored running through them. No matter how many times I ran through the same rooms, the strength of their design never ceased to amaze me. Mechanically, these levels are damn near perfect. But visually, these levels are fucking gorgeous. Sure, maybe it's just my penchant for this particular art style. Sure, they rely heavily on inspiration and nostalgia. Sure, they're fantastical and indulgent, but dude, just open your eyes and let those bad boys feast. The neon energy of the club contrasts so well with the blazing carnage paving the way to Sean's boss fight. The craziest part is that those two things are in the same level. All those colours are then muted and sterilised to emphasise the stern nature of the next level, the museum, which itself holds expansive lobbies and high ceilings while still preserving the beautiful artistry hidden within its decorated rooms. Dude, I could go on and on about how good this game looks. But we'll be here all day and I'm not talented enough to paint a sufficient picture. Slow Clap are the ones holding the brush, so I'm just gonna let them cook. There's one mechanic that I believe makes Sifu sing. One mechanic that outshines all others, including the incredible combat. One that I believe has never been as skillfully executed as it has in Sifu. The progression. Progression in Sifu is not tied down to numbers or stats. It's tied to mastery, constant and consistent improvement, which perfectly captures the fantasy the game was built upon. Progression in Sifu works like this: 5 levels, 5 bosses, 1 goal. Finish all 5 levels, defeat all 5 bosses. There is no time limit, but there is an age limit. When you die in Sifu, and you will, again and 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 again, your character will age. The amount of years you age is determined by your death counter, which continually stacks. Once your age talisman breaks, your run is over. Now, this could have been the ultimate depth of this mechanic and it would have worked fine. Die, restart, until eventually you conquer all 5 levels in one go. But Slow Clap had an ace up their sleeve. The end of Sifu is not the goal. Perfection is the goal. Completing a level in Sifu is an accomplishment, but the age at which you complete it can be deemed a failure. You don't just master the game of Sifu, you master the levels, you master the environment, you master the enemies, the weapons, the bosses, the combos. And once you've mastered it all, god damn does Sifu sing. But the journey to mastery is far from easy. It's actually one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in a game, which makes the reward oh so satisfying. Sifu tackles reward masterfully. Sure, there are permanent moves and upgrades you can unlock, but these are in no way necessary. Sifu doesn't reward you by granting you anything. Your numbers don't go up, your stats don't get better, the enemies don't get weaker. Sifu simply rewards you for getting better. Sifu rewards you for improvement. It rewards you for perfection. An encounter that was repeatedly challenging is now child's play, replacing your acute anxiety with inner peace. The fantasy of mastery is something that I found myself so strongly attached to. Mastery in Sifu doesn't come from memorizing a moveset, it comes from responding to it. Each swing, sweep and stab needs to be carefully considered, as they can come at any time, and from anyone. You can't brute force your way through an encounter, you need to evaluate it. What tools are at your disposal? How many enemies? What types? And after all that, how can you maul your way through them? Mastery in Sifu isn't about speed, it's about efficiency. And that fact is what makes Sifu stand alone. The more aggressive you are, the more threatened you become. Enemies don't attack one by one, they come at you all at once. Enemies constantly surround you, so tunnel vision for any particular one can prove costly. Attacks come swiftly, and they come often, so weaving a defensive dodge or perfectly timed parry between attacks is your best bet. Combat is very fast, so if you try and match that speed, then chances are you will be met with failure. Mastery is only achieved when you can slow down combat. You don't know when an enemy will attack, but you know that they will. Preparation is pivotal, and picturing how a group of enemies will go down before you even start engaging them is how you always stay one step ahead. Once you begin to broaden your perspective during an encounter is when the fantasy of Sifu really starts to shine. And it's a fantasy that I never knew I needed to fulfill before I started playing Sifu. Ever since I was a kid, I have been a massive fan of martial arts movies. Jet Li, Donnie Yen, Bruce Lee, Sammo Hung, Jackie Chan, Tony Jaa, the list goes on and on. The epitome of physical perfection, not in appearance, but in discipline. These men were so adept at their craft. The sheer precision with which they tackled the art of a fight, both in practice and behind the camera, was something I came to utterly adore. I loved these films, but I only recently came to realize the main reason for that love was the fantasy. When Jet Li took down an entire room full of foes, he did it with zero unfair advantages. All he had was his fists, his feet, and his mind, his skill. And I really resonated with that because, let's be honest, Jet Li was, to put it kindly, tiny. But with his martial prowess, he towered above everyone. Sifu perfectly fulfills that fantasy because it's directly inspired by what came before. Its inspirations are creeping out of every crevice within every level, culminating in boss fights that are torn straight from the films they're inspired by. But that isn't a bad thing. Whether it's the colors, the vibrancy, the energy, the tone, the cinematography, or even the combat moves themselves, Sifu wears its inspiration on its sleeve. Sifu isn't a derivative copycat of the art it is based on, it is a fully realized translation. Kung Fu isn't just about the violence or the action, it's about the spirit, essence, and culture. Translating that into an interactive art form like video games is a monumental task, but Slow Clap seem to approach it in all the right ways. Rather than just make Kung Fu the foundation for the gameplay, they made it the foundation for the game. The influence of Kung Fu on Sifu is palpable, but its implementation is handled with the greatest respect. Every element of Sifu is cohesive and connected without seeming contrived. The love and passion for the world of Kung Fu is so obvious that I can't help but rest a moment to take it all in. This is where my primary praise for this game resides. Slow Clap committed wholeheartedly to their design choices because they didn't want to jeopardize the integrity of what drove them. Sifu is not an easily accessible game. It's not for the faint-hearted, and it is definitely not for those who lack patience. It is genuinely so fucking frustrating. But the intention behind the difficulty is so compelling to me. The difficulty is only there to help advance the gameplay, the world, and the characters. If there's any ideas I've presented that I really want to drive home, it's this. Sifu's design is one of cohesion. Each element has been so meticulously thought out. They greatly complement one another while remaining standout features in their own right. But when the music kicks in, is when all those elements roar in unison. The music is the backbone of Sifu. The music is what articulates the style, the story, and the stress of this game. The percussive beats of Howie Lee give each swing more intent and each strike more power. Nowhere is the score so perfectly punctuated than in the game's opening. We cut through a sea of red to find enemies dressed in black, a tease of the bosses to come. Our journey to mastery began here, and it's here that we trained. Sifu is not an accessible game. Its progression is unforgiving, and its repetition is frustrating. To excel in Sifu, you must learn. And while the game does teach, to master is to practice. There's no hand-holding, just patience and repetition. Sifu is self-driven. If you do not have the willpower to continue playing, you will stop playing. I found myself at the brink of breaking so many times, but what Sifu offered me if I just pushed through is something that I have never received from any other game. The strength to get back after a loss is something you earn, not something you're given. You're not given more lives, you're given time. Time to improve, time to focus. And you need to focus in Sifu. Enemies overwhelm you. They all come at once. So, who do you choose to take down first? Who's next? How do you take them down? How can they take you down? How do you counter that? So many decisions, so little time. But the more time you take, the more rewards will follow. But what resonated with me most is not the satisfaction of those rewards, but the beauty of what surrounded it, the intensity of its creativity, the unwavering confidence of its design, the great respect it paid to what inspired it. But ultimately, Sifu provoked a feeling I've never felt presented in this way before. Pride. Not pride in my accomplishment, or pride in my ability, or pride in my eventual mastery, but pride in my resilience. My resilience to push through a struggle and appreciate the beauty of what lay beyond. I have come to absolutely adore Sifu. It's a game that reminded me of what came before, while wholly dedicating itself to what it is. It's a game that reminded me to appreciate just how much I love its influence. It's a game that is so confident in its mechanics and so innovative in its ideas. It's a game that is not only willing, but forceful in its desire to push the boundaries in what is possible for an action game. I did not care about its characters. I did not care about its story or its ending, but I came to care about its difficulty and the meaning behind it. I cared about its world. Its absolutely stunning world. I have such deep admiration for the intention behind this game. Its foundation is so strong, so unbreakable, that to those who don't understand it, it will be forgotten. But to those who do understand it, to those who do appreciate it, there's only one thing left to say. Sifu is a goddamn masterpiece.